Alrighty, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Spotlight. Today we have the one and only Sam Poage back again for part 3 before he graduates.
Yeah, I'm back. Couldn't keep me away.
Yeah, we tried to put him down, but we couldn't. Sam is the second best French horn in the world, I think. As well as a historian who's about to graduate and get that bachelor's degree. But Sam, why don't you go ahead and just reintroduce yourself and some of the important things about you?
Yeah, so my name's Sam Poage.
It's just like it's trying to kiss you the whole time. Did you see that?
I think it's a cord.
Yeah, I gotta at least tighten that up. There we go. Go ahead.
I'm a history major. I'm about to graduate in what's the day? Like the 20th?
Today's the 20th.
Yeah, 25 days.
Yeah.
A month. I'm nervous. Some things about me. I want to go to grad school. I'm interested in Reconstruction, Civil War history. I like to play Rainbow Six Siege, but I'm retired now. So
You're sober, you mean?
yeah, so I like to play games, I've been getting into reading books, stone carving, stuff like that. So
Damn, how's your collection going?
of books?
Yeah.
Pretty good. I just got a first edition U.S. and French Civil War diplomacy book.
There you go. There you go. For all my French diplomacy nerds out there, this is your guy for
Lynn
sure.
M. Case. Masterpiece. I read that whole book back to front.
Really?
Front to back, yeah, I did.
Damn, that's crazy.
I had to for my paper that I've been writing.
Oh, okay. It wasn't like a pleasure.
I probably would have read it anyway.
A pleasure.
But
read.
I read it and I was like, wow, this is really good.
It's just that's so crazy, and that's just the whole perspective of reading that I just have not unlocked yet. It's so funny that you just have these books these manuals, these
Dude.
instruction booklets that are barely being held together by other things that are just
First edition from 1970, minimal wear for $25.
What a steal.
People who read books,
What a steal. It's not even that fresh book smell either. It's that old book smell.
The pages are yellowed. It's 53 years old, man.
Damn. Got asbestos in it in between each page.
It's pretty good.
It's a fresh diagnosis every time you read a new chapter, bro.
Minimal drawing in it. A lot of times when you get these academic books, it's from people who have been drawing and highlighting stuff.
Yeah.
The worst people ever.
So good. No notes. Damn, dude. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, it's bizarre how my perspective on, who you are has changed from being that bitch who stole my Cumberland Cross solo for 3 years in a row to now you're just you're an academic resource. You know what I mean? You're you're genuinely a historian. It's so wild because you're about to get your degree, and I think I officiated you in my mind as a smart person to talk to in history. But
thank you.
Even beyond that, you're about to get the degree. So I guess. How has your college experience been? How have the 4 years been?
Pretty good so far. I'd like to point one thing out is that, I could still do the Cumberland Cross even now.
If we
put me in a French horn, I got it.
I would love to bust out. I haven't played the French horn in 2.5 years. I would love for you and me to sit down and try to make noise. Try to make noise on French horns together.
I was telling Lucy about it. That I was like, oh, if I got a French horn, I'd pick it right back up.
Yeah, no, you wouldn't, dude. We learned how to play that the last year, year before you graduated, and we're finally learning the actual fingerings and everything like that. That's so funny.
College experience, it's pretty good. I would say it's definitely not for everyone. That's been my general experience. I've met a lot of people who really enjoy it like I do, and some people who just absolutely hate it.
Yeah,
I think it depends a lot on what you do, and what you do with your time, the people that you hang out with.
Well, yeah, and what sucked about your college experience is you came here for COVID that first year, and it was...
I almost dropped out because of that.
Yeah, and you had a different major, didn't you?
I was a comp sci major my first semester, and then I was an advertising major my second semester.
So you've really been through the meat grinder.
When I look at my transcripts, because I got to send those off for grad applications, my first 2 semesters...
Just don't even mean it. Well, and that's crazy that you still graduated early because you're graduating a semester early.
If I would have done it, I probably could have graduated a whole year early.
That's insane. What does that come from? I don't even. Is that just?
I did DMAC in high school. I got on my Gen Ed stuff and some history courses because I was like, I want to be a history major, but then my dad was like, "Comp sci's where's the money at?" I'm like, I like money.
yeah, I guess don't we all, right?
and then I had to do calc, and I was like,
You're like, maybe comp sci. I'd rather read my French diplomacy.
That was before that too, because then I did advertising because I was like, well, I don't want to just go to history.
Yeah. Do you think there's been a steady increase in your interest in history because you've done it as a major?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I want to make it my job now. So
Oh, okay. So you're in.
I'm
You're
in, dude.
you're
I have no backup plan.
if this doesn't work out, then it's just like, and it doesn't work out.
Well, you can't really do that much with a history degree, a bachelor's in history, but
Yeah.
I'll probably figure something out. There's plenty of avenues. It's just that the job market for history degrees isn't very good.
Yeah, but I mean, you have a pretty close relationship with your like professors and stuff, don't you?
I do, yeah. All the history professors know me.
That's really cool. I don't think I have anything close to that right now.
Well, I mean, the history department's pretty small, and I'm also in Phi Alpha Theta, which is like the honor society, and so all the professors know me.
So you're like the history student.
Yeah, Phi Alpha Theta opened a student lounge on the 6th floor of Ross specifically for history students.
There
If
you
you're
go.
not
I was
history-
wondering how that was going. Did they get the furniture out?
Yeah, they did. Yeah,
Okay,
they did.
yeah.
And then they put up a picture, and I'm in the picture with like the founding group. So
Dude,
my name's on that.
It's like named after you, like the study lounge, the Sam Pogue study lounge.
I wish, but
The Pogue lounge, that'd be so sick.
yeah, it's pretty nice. It's got some good furniture. It's got a Keurig and a microwave and a fridge. So
As you guys are making it home, because and no furniture stacked up on top of it. So.
absolutely no box TV.
Yeah, that's history, dude. You should have kept that so you can watch.
I
some
asked
old-
the coordinator if we could keep it, and she said no.
Damn, dude, you should have just kept it. Put that. Just
It's at the
imagine-
ISU surplus store now.
Oh,
You can buy it.
I'll say buy what for like $10.
I don't know. I don't
It's
know
like
how much
super,
stuff
like
is there.
super cheap there, dude. You should just get it and it's like a shelf decoration, especially if it's a small one. You have like all your history books in this.
Nah, dog. It's the size of this TV.
Oh,
It's the size of
okay.
this table. It's like
It's one of those
It's
monster boxes.
huge.
Okay, it's the movie theater TV. Yeah,
it's huge. There's no way.
damn. Well, I wondered specifically in like the academic process. Do you feel, because this is something that I'm struggling with, I do not feel even close to more competent in my studies because of like schooling at all. I feel like the college that I've done has been learning from like social things, learning from like
Okay.
other conversations I've had with people, and everything adjacent to college, but not in the classroom. How do you feel about like your actual learning and competency now that you're about to graduate?
I would say it's definitely improved. I think the thing that's improved the most is probably my paper writing.
Okay.
Because like I was telling you before we started, I just finished my undergraduate thesis.
And that was 30 pages.
30 pages. The minimum's 25.
Can you please send that to me?
Oh yeah, it's my magnum opus.
What's it about?
U.S. Civil War diplomacy, foreign policy.
Okay, and so that was what you were studying up on when we had that conversation, and you were telling me about
Yeah.
these like very stressed out letters across like nations.
Yeah, it's my thesis my thesis question is what made Union Civil War diplomacy in 1861 to 1862 the most pivotal for the Union winning the war? That was like the question that I asked.
Okay.
And so I had to do a lot of research, more research than I actually needed, because I filled a notebook and a half and I went through like 2 or 3 pens and I just like when I sat down to write it, I was like, there's no way I'm gonna be able to write this paper. And then come to find out I finished it and it was 30 pages. Like, shoot, man, I went over.
Yeah. You should just went all out and just because okay.
I had to cut a lot of notes.
That's crazy. Was there like a max limit on how long it could be?
Well, my professor, Dr. Wong, he's never said that you couldn't have more, but he's like, you should. It's more about how well your argument is rather than the length.
Right.
He said if you could argue it in 10 pages, then it would be fine.
Oh, okay. So yeah, you went like triple.
But the length that you're supposed to shoot for is 25. That's the syllabus like length.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so like you just got those 5 pages over as
It's
a
comforting.
cut version. Yeah. Damn, dude.
Yeah.
That's crazy. How did that? I don't think I've written something like that or
I've
like
never
done the
written
study
anything this
process or done the studying process. How do you even work on that? I don't even.
It's such a mountain, dude. If you saw my room right now, I'll send you a picture of my room after this podcast.
Please
because
do.
Next to my desk, there is just mountains of books and there's note cards everywhere and like
It's what I'd expect from a history major, though. Like,
it's kind of gross.
like your hair is wild and you have like scribbles on like.
the amount of nights where I just didn't sleep, just like I just stayed up all night and just worked on it. It's insane.
Dang,
I mean,
dude.
you got to think about it. It's like when you're writing a paper this big, first you have to come up with the question. Well, first you have to find the topic, and then you have to find the question. And then you have to read copious amounts of sources talking about, is this even a valid question?
Yeah.
And then we had to write this thing called a prospectus, which is like it's essentially your paper proposal to your teacher, and he could reject it because if it wasn't, the whole goal was that you had to write something that would contribute to the overall conversation of history.
Mm-hmm.
And my question is, obviously I just said it, but nobody's ever written specifically about that. They all write about like the general war and like the overview of the war, but they never specifically talk about 1861 to 1862 and the influence of the diplomacy that occurred in those 2 years.
Damn. And so, what do you think the hourage was? Just like total hourage of that paper.
Dude, I mean,
Lowball me a number.
I don't know. I mean, if you think about it, I started this in August. So then I had to find all the books. I didn't read all the entirety of the books. I think if you go check my like library checkout list, I probably have like 25 books. But I didn't read those books all entirety. I just had to read. I had to like look at the notes, and I had to like look at it if it pertains to my area at all, and then read all that. And then my system of notes was like, I would be like page number 200, and I would take notes, a page of notes for all the notes stuff in 200, and I would star stuff, and like it would take me probably 3 hours to read 30 pages because 10 pages in an hour, I'm like spending reading, taking notes, like tying stuff together. And then after that, once I had all my notes, I went through and I color coordinated it all. So it was like I divided by year. So it was like pink was 1862, yellow was 1861. And then I went in through each note and I divided it up by like event. So it's like cotton famine is this color, blockade is this color. There's like another section, intervention was this color. That helps significantly.
So do you think that you're among the average of history majors? Like, do you think everybody would have went that sicko mode on their thesis? Or do you think that, like, if I talk to a history major, are they going to have had the experience that you had with your thesis?
Nobody will ever have this experience unless they've taken 495, which is the class that I had to write it for. And actually, I've talked to a bunch of people in my class, and our teacher put out some pretty scary statistics. It was like, so we had 14 people starting out this year. When the paper will be, or when the rough draft will be due, I guess when the outline was due, which was last week, he said that 75% of the people had not turned in their topic proposal, and like 50% of the people who did turn in the topic proposal didn't turn in the prospectus. So there's only like a handful of people who've actually done the work. And then on top of that, it was like, now you're at like the hardest part. And he's like, some of you will not get this done. Some of you will not be able to write the paper. And then he said, like, out of like this class last year, like 4 or 5 people didn't pass.
Wait, so I'm talking to like a full-blown nerd right now. Like
I had no other option. I had to go hard or else I would fall behind.
I was saying, I mean, good on you, dude. That is insane.
I'm the only, see, I started writing it November 1st. I was doing a page a day, but then I just said, screw that. And I was like, I just need to actually crank this out because I have to submit all my grad school applications by December 1st. Mm-hmm. So I had to have this done because it's my writing proposal. And so I ensured that I got it done. When I was talking to people, like some people haven't even started it. And the rough draft, which is just the entire thing, just without like all the sources and stuff, is due the 28th, which is the Tuesday after this break. Yeah. So there are poor souls in my 495 class that are writing their 25-page paper in a week over Thanksgiving, and I'm like, I would go crazy.
Yeah, dang, dude. I guess good on you, dude. Good on you.
I don't say that I'm like necessarily like more or less more like nerdy about it. I would just say that my time management skills is unheard of.
Yeah, it's not comparable to any of your peers.
Yeah,
for sure. Well, dude, I mean that's crazy, and I read your 490 paper, which you just forgot about.
I don't know what it is.
Which is really funny. It's about it's kind of one of them is your proposition for a collection of a certain catalog of books.
I know what you're talking about now.
Yeah, to put into history, like classes when you're teaching people about history, specifically with the Reconstruction era.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And so I just read that, and even I wrote down a ton of questions that I had for that.
Did you read my 301 paper that I sent you all those years ago?
Yeah, about the couple who lived in Iowa State and like started their own chicken. Yeah, I did.
Did I tell you that it got published?
That okay? Because you said on the thing that you were a published author. Is that what got published?
Yeah, in the Iowa History Journal, it's published. I gave free copies at the end of December.
Walk me through. What does that look like? What did you do for that?
I wrote out this paper. It's the only paper. It's the most complete history of Bess and Fred Ferguson to ever be written.
Yeah.
And so I was like, man, someone's got to want this. So then I shot my shot.
Who'd you send it to?
The owner of this magazine, Iowa History Journal.
Yeah, sorry. Walk me through exactly what you did, because I want to publish things like in my lifetime too. So.
I wrote the paper.
Yeah.
To last fall. In that time, I knew it was special because when I was writing it, it was all primary sources from Iowa State Archives, so nobody had written on that much. Then I just emailed this guy, the owner of Iowa History Journal, this summer, and I was like, "Hey, man, my goal before I graduate is I want to get a paper published, and I have the most complete history on this couple, and I think it's like the perfect embodiment of the Iowan spirit." Mm-hmm. And so he was like, "Yeah, man, let's do it." So then he sent me all the requirements, and I was like, "I'm not gonna be able to do this because I had to do APA, I had to cut 800 words, I had to find pictures," and I was like, "Hey, man, I'm not gonna be able to do this. I'm about to graduate. If you in like the time allotted, I would have had like only a month to get it all done and send it in." He's like, "Oh, that's fine, no worries, I'll do it for you." So he did the APA and he did the cut down for me. I just had to find the pictures. So I got him the pictures, and then it was set in stone. And I got him all the citation information and all that stuff. And so he said it was so well cited, my paper, he said that my paper was so well cited that it made it easy for him to do it. So so he could just do it. And so then it's getting published. Iowa History Journal is a journal in Iowa that's published in Des Moines, and it solely focuses on Iowa history, and it covers a broad range of topics. It could be from like the founding of Iowa all the way to like a little bit of modern day, probably like 2000. And so if you have a good paper about Iowa history, the owner, forgetting his name, would love to have it. But
is it like a relatively big journal for like history journals? Like,
yeah, it's pretty popular, I would say. It's not like a necessarily academic paper, but it is circulated, and it publishes 6 editions a year.
Okay, yeah.
So I am either the January-February edition of 2024, or I am the November-December edition of 2023.
Dang. And so this is like...
And I got paid $50.
$50, dude, full-time job. All I say is be a journal writer for different historical topics. That's really... You're the go-to if anybody wants to learn about these 2 specific people.
Yeah. And actually, I have even cooler news about that I didn't put in the thing is Dr. Bremer, who's a professor at Iowa State, just is writing a book about Iowa during the Great Depression, and he told me that when it's published, he wants a copy of it because he wants to cite it in his book. So,
hey, dude, you got published and cited.
Yeah.
For people who are like in academia, this is like the coolest news ever.
I know. I haven't even graduated yet.
I'll say that probably looks so good on my
grad school stuff. Yeah,
dude, that's really cool.
I already got teeth in the game.
Yeah, that's really cool. Dude, you got people looking at you like, yeah, published author Samuel Poage.
Yeah.
Doctor, or once you become doctor. Too.
I put in I had an author bio and everything. It's looking pretty good.
You need to send me your author bio. I want to see like
I'll send you a copy
about the author. And
I'll see how many free copies I get. I didn't give him a picture, but if I get I don't know how many free copies I get, but if I get one, I'll sign it and I'll give it to you.
No, dude, yes, actually though, like a signed sample. I'm talking to like a professional historian right now. Yeah. Well, and I thought what was crazy about that paper is you and me talked about on our first episode about like the importance of living history now, knowing that it would get preserved later, and that like your life is like this deep, view of somebody in the future looking at you right now.
Yeah.
And then you write this paper about 2 people that nobody's ever heard of. And do you think that they would have ever thought that like somebody would have researched them and like written a paper about them like 100 years later?
I don't think so. Probably not, because I mean, I was like reading like tax documents and personal letters and stuff.
Which is so wild though. Like, could you imagine you're getting studied
I
100
can't
years
imagine
now.
that letters that I'd be sending to my family would be in an archive being written about.
But in this, it'd be texts. So it'd be like,
Yeah, it'd
"Dad,
probably-
you up?"
Something like that, yeah.
some like dumb text like that. That's just wild. I mean, if because we were talking about just like the importance of living history, and then you're like you're literally doing that for other people. So
Yeah, it's a pretty big deal to be published as a history major. So it's
It's
kind of like it's a
really
huge
cool.
accomplishment, especially before you graduate.
I know. I submitted a philosophy paper to a writing contest, and
Alright.
I think one of their things is like you'll get published in one of their things if you get like top 3.
Let's
so
go,
I'm
let's
really
go.
hoping I get top 3. I really like that. I thought it was a pretty good paper, but
Yeah, I'm thinking about getting maybe seeing if my undergrad thesis can get published.
us if
because-
it's 30 pages.
well, 30 pages is pretty standard for an article, but nobody's ever written about what I've written about
Mhm.
to as specific as I have. So
Yeah.
I think it'd be worth.
Yeah, please send that to me. And next time I'm on here, I'll grill you about that. But I got some questions
yeah.
about your paper that I wanna get to. So I guess first off, just describe briefly do you remember what this paper is about?
If I remember correctly, it's about my independence study. So I covered a book. Don't remember the title of the book, but I'm pretty sure it's about like a slave who goes to the South Carolina Congress, the first one,
Mm-hmm.
and then I wrote about writing a compendium of Civil War and Reconstruction history for schools.
Yeah, okay. And so I don't know. Okay, so I guess my first couple questions, just in general, and especially if you're writing this thesis paper, like how do you go about deciding what perspectives are accurate and for what reasons when you're like quoting people or you're like doing research, like you're reading these books and it's just normal people that you're like quoting. You know what I mean? Like what gives them the credit of being the truth or like representing this? You know what I mean? I don't know how you even.
Well, I mean, that is a good question. When I write this paper, when I wrote my big paper, it's all about like diplomacy and foreign policy and stuff. So the stuff that I'm quoting is direct quotes from like official U.S. documents. The library has these collection of books called it's like Foreign Papers of the U.S. and then it'll have like a year on it. And so I have the 1860 through 1863 books. And so it's all these like official letters between U.S. diplomats. And so when you ask about like the legitimacy of it, it's like
That's
these are
about
the
as
people.
good as it gets. Yeah.
Like these are
Yeah.
government officials
Yeah.
writing these.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about, oh, I need like a good perspective, like a true perspective of the war, it doesn't get much truer.
Yeah, because these are the people doing it.
These are the people that decide the fate of the war. These are
Right.
the people that decide the fate of the U.S. It's like, if these people aren't trustworthy, then like, I don't know.
then nobody could ever do
Yeah.
history if like you couldn't
Yeah.
rely on these people.
Yeah.
But what about like more broader papers that don't have like an official spokesperson? So like on the generality of slavery, you know what I mean? Like when you're talking about like a slave's perspective, or you're talking about like one slave owner's perspective. Like what is the?
I think all perspectives on history are good because it's important when you write a big paper like that to include like people's opinions that oppose what your thesis is. But when it comes to like perspectives on like, I guess just like normal people, I think it really, I mean, it comes down to how they were captured. Because if there's like a collection of documents, I believe, conducted by the state of Mississippi, where they went around in like the early 1900s and they were asking former slaves on their opinion of slavery, and it was done by like state officials, and like it's like actual written transcripts, and like those are important because those are firsthand documents. But then if you find someone who used those quotes in a book and they add their own opinion, I suppose you have to be able to diffuse those between like the actual thing and the second opinion. I guess it just comes down to like what you're writing about, what's the source, like what's the credibility of the source, and how is the source used.
Yeah, and for me, I think it's just a natural born skeptic, but it would seem like an impossible task for me to like assess all of these words that people are saying and like the validity of it. Because if I were to, you know, like write a paper about like I don't know Israel Palestine right now, you know what I mean, and I were to like talk to people who are doing that, if I just because somebody's like in Israel, that doesn't mean that they're like knowledgeable about what's going on. You know what I mean? Like they could just be getting affected by it, but they have no clue like actually what's going on. And so I feel like that perspective would be one that I'd try to avoid. But like, who do I talk to at that point? Then you know what I mean. I feel like you could like get that credibility beyond and
Yeah,
further
I
that
mean,
too.
when like if you write a paper about like perspectives of war and like tragedies and stuff like that, like World War II stuff, um, I mean, I'm sure they had interviews with like civilians of under Nazi living in Nazi Germany who were pro, obviously affected by the propaganda. But though, I mean, those are important testimonies too because that gives you a window into how the propaganda was perceived in the public, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
And like all when you look at like when you're writing a history of something, I would say that unless it's like academically discredited and like well known to be like incorrect, all opinions and all like transcripts are valid.
yeah. And I agree. I think it depends on how you present it. You know what I mean? Like if you
Yeah.
just like this is the fact because one person said that this is how they felt. Like that's a different thing than being like to give you a glimpse on how people feel. Like I liked that this description of it. Like it's more of getting like a glimpse of like what life was like back then from like a person who does it, and like that's valid too. And the
Yeah.
way it's I like the way that you describe that. And again, it's not that I necessarily disagree. It's just um,
It's a good question.
yeah, I don't know how I would go about doing it, which is why I'm asking you because like you did it, you know what I mean? Like you successfully,
Yeah.
hopefully, went through these things and decided these things. Um, so in the general education you are looking to create, how did you decide upon the sources? So you had those books that you referenced as like here are the collection of 5 books that I would add into the full like referendum of
Yeah.
knowledge that we would do. Um, how did you decide that those were accurate like resources or tellings of those things?
Well, I read a lot of them during my independent study with my professor, and I felt that they pieced together a really good narrative of what the South was actually like. And they're also all very well respected books written by very respected authors. And I felt like they don't shy away from what the atrocities of slavery were in Reconstruction, and instead of just depicting them as an atrocity, they also use it as like an educational, like a launch pad,
Yeah. And so do you think that's more of like the the theme it takes in the book provides a good perspective, as well as like it's accredited and good. Like you are more looking for how can you construct an accurate narrative from all sides. Is that kind of how you were?
Yeah, I want people to be able to read that compendium of books and be able to see all sides from the slave to the poor white to the north to the slave master. All those people were living in the same time, and all whether they weren't directly influencing or like directly living in, let's say, specific events, they were all part of the greater event, which was slavery, Reconstruction, the Civil War. I think those are all really important. I feel like a lot of the time when people read a book, they oftentimes get one perspective, and that's why I think putting them all together would really make it like a complete narrative for someone. So if I remember correctly, I put those books together as it was like a entry into the field. As like you read this book, now you're briefed with what you should know as like a standard, and then if you want to look further, you can base your knowledge off of what you just read to dive into like more specific topics.
Yeah. So it acts kind of like as a base to
Yeah.
what you should be learning and stuff.
It's what you should know
Yeah.
if you're going to be interested.
Yeah. Which I'd always wondered like how that process begins and like who decides like what is our educational material and like how should we reference this stuff. And so did you kind of see a void in that, and that's why you prescribed like a new thing, or like why do you think that there should be like a newer education.
I just think the field is understudied and underrepresented. I mean, we could probably both agree that Madrid High School's history of the South, it was not anything.
It's not super comprehensive.
It talks about slavery, it talks about the slave trade, talk about the Civil War, but like you don't dive too deep. And maybe that's just because it's a high school class.
Yeah.
But I feel like a big problem today is that people don't really understand what it was or the true impact that it has today, and how it still affects people to this day. And I feel like if people actually knew what was going on, if people could get a better picture of what society was like back then and actually understand how it translates to modern day, I think we as a society would be a lot better off.
What do you think people don't necessarily understand about it? And like, what kind of impacts are you talking about?
Well, it's just like surface level stuff that high schools teach and stuff like that. And I feel, there's obviously a lot of political tension today with like the Black Lives Matter movement, and a lot of people are against these kind of movements, but they don't understand, where the origins of these people, come from, like where the origins of their struggle come from, and how, we today they still suffer today from the effects of slavery.
Right. And then what's like the broader theme of that? Like, what's the broader purpose of that education? So like when people say things like that like this history has affected them to today, and also regardless of its validity, which I would assume it is coming from someone who studies it. What's the purpose of that though? So like what meaning do you derive from that statement? Is that kind of like a motivation to do something about it, to change something about it, to educate people in general? Like what? Like walk me through your motivation. And
I just think that it's kind of sad to think that people just don't know, or they don't understand the gravity of it. And there's actually a huge problem right now of like politicians banning books surrounding this topic. There are schools that refuse to teach what the real, slavery was like, what the slave trade was like, what was the Civil War like, what was it like to be there, because some people deem it too graphic. And I argue that if you only teach about the victors, and if you only lightly touch on the atrocities, then people will forget the atrocities. And that's kind of what's happening right now. They're being undermined. The whole idea of slavery, the history of slavery in America, is being undermined. And it's being overshadowed by just kind of like American, I would say like American patriotism almost, in a way. Like like some people just don't want to acknowledge it today. They're saying, oh, well, it's in the past, right? So it doesn't matter, but it does matter.
yeah. Well, I think how people cope with that decision is you have this, you kind of have this cost and balance. Like, okay, reading about these things is uncomfortable. It makes me uncomfortable. It makes my kids uncomfortable. It's like graphic or whatever slew of excuses they
History
use.
is supposed to make you uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I have all these things, or like it paints white people bad, or whatever, like slew of reasons you have that are in the negative. I guess what I'm asking is like you have this positive that needs to outweigh that. You know what I mean? And so like you have this historical preservation because it's a wanting of truth, which I think is super important. But I think people who don't share that love for history are going to struggle to balance that out. So kind of, are there other things that preserve, or that should really balance out the preservation of this history, or the conversation of this history? Because somehow people have weighed it as like it's a net negative to talk about these things, and so you'd want to like add the positives of talking about these things to kind of balance that out, even if they're totally incorrect, But
I mean, if you a positive from looking at it is that, well, one, it can't be repeated. If you know about how bad it actually was, then people wouldn't allow this to happen again. Not saying that it is going to happen again, but it's the same reason why, people talk about the Holocaust so much and hold it at such like a high regard, is because, you need to understand how bad it was and why it cannot happen again. And that's the thing. And like I said, history is supposed to make you uncomfortable, because if it didn't, then I think there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, like you're probably not seeing the full scope.
You're not seeing the bigger picture, the bigger problem. I just think right now more than ever, it's important to really talk about the bad parts of history, and to not just focus on the British losing in 1776 or the Allies winning in World War II. You know, you could have this same argument for, you know, the Vietnam War. You know, a lot of people feel very passionate about that. A lot of people today will say that America has never lost any wars, but that is simply not true. Yeah, you know, I just think that people just need to talk about the bad parts of history to really make the good parts of history, I suppose, seem better or seem more valid. But yeah,
more so as a deterrent from repeating, which is, I mean, one of the most classic mantras of history.
It is, but it's so true though.
Yeah,
it's so true.
And I've never heard that perspective applied to why this stuff should be like taught. You know, like in a specific scenario of history. I think a lot of people they combat this by saying it paints a narrative that isn't necessarily true today, as in a lot of people's qualms with it are that it makes white people look bad today in perspective of, you know, what had happened. And so I guess like what do you have to say that like either makes that not true?
Boo-hoo.
Do you think that in that scale, do you think that balances out in the importance of preserving the truth, or the importance of not repeating that stuff, as opposed to maybe making people look bad?
I mean, I just don't understand the history that we learn in America is very westernized, and so the white people are going to be the focal point.
Yeah.
And white people are the majority in the United States, and sure, they've done some good things, but slavery, especially this, a lot of people will say, what was I going to say? A lot of people will say that, slavery in America wasn't that bad because other people, other places, especially, in Africa, Africans had slavery. But the slavery that Africans did and the slavery that Americans did is completely different.
How so?
You could not, if you were a slave in America, you could not earn your freedom. You could not, it was just so much harsher. Your kids would be born into it. Families were split apart. In Africa, they had slavery, but you could earn your way out of it. You could eventually become free. It's more in like other forms of slavery that have usually plagued history. It's more of like a, how do I say, like an indebtedness almost, like you're indebted to the people you're enslaved by, rather than slavery in America, which was just like, these people are lesser than me. These people are not people. In some respects, white Southerners viewed it as an act of God to bring these people to salvation and save them from what they called savagery, which was just living in Africa. And it's just like it's way, way worse than what other forms of slavery have ever been.
Yeah, but surely there was like kind of a standard, which doesn't make it like okay. And I don't understand why people bring it up in that context. But like surely there was just like a universal standard, though. Like I don't think people were necessarily looking at the West and like comparing their own slavery to the West slavery. They weren't like, oh, our slavery is like that slavery is terrible, but this slavery is fine. You know what I mean? Like, do you think? I feel like those comparisons are made like in the present because we can make them, but I don't think at the time.
No, not at the time.
Yeah, I don't think anybody was like
people in 1800s were not saying, well, that's so much worse. That's
yeah. At least we're not like them, But at the same time,
no. That's what I'm saying today, though. Today, that is an argument that is made.
Yeah.
Because people don't like it when you say white people are bad, but not to say that.
Yeah. I think this is just a super important part, and it's probably something that you're going to I guess, like, have to talk about. And it's going to be one of the criticisms that you might receive regardless of what you write. Like, whatever truth you feel like you have to say, whatever research you have to do, whatever perspective, it's going to get challenged in this kind of context because it's inherently, like, uncomfortable to hear and talk about.
Talking
So,
about being a historian surrounded by slavery is it's a very touchy thing
right,
because
yeah.
you will get discredited. You know,
Yeah.
people don't like to hear about it. People don't like to read about it. But I think you should.
Yeah. So you chose a very challenging, maybe this is why everybody wants to
It's
do
kind
World
of
War II.
It's a niche topic. You know, you don't get to talk about how many T-34s were used in the Battle of the Bulge.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
You don't get to talk about you don't get to talk about where the Roman coins were minted or who was the best emperor.
Yeah. Yeah. The Roman Empire, which you think about. What you think about every other day.
When you study slavery, it is your duty as a historian to paint the real truth, to do those people right, and to let the people know who are reading your stuff that this is how it happened. You know, that it has effects today, and that you should be reading it regardless if it makes you uncomfortable.
That's a hard duty to uphold. I feel like you could have made this much easier if you just studied World War II.
It's interesting. It's the reason why I got into it. It's because I knew so little. It hit when I took a class with Dr. McTinnell here at Iowa State. It hit me like a wall. I was like, I really don't know what I'm talking about.
Is that where a lot of your interests lied?
And I wanted to know more. And I was like, wow, I had only scratched the surface with what I knew of slavery and Reconstruction history and stuff like that.
What percentage of the truth do you think most people understand about, like, slavery and that whole concept? How uneducated do you feel like people generally are?
I mean, I feel like people understand what it was. Obviously, people understand it was a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think most people are oblivious to, like, I suppose, like, most people know it's bad. I guess the stuff that I'm looking at is pretty, like, I wouldn't say advanced, but it's like if the stuff that I'm reading is like, if you want to know, you'd have to read these academic books. But at the same time, though, the compendium that I put together would get you a good baseline, I think, to understand, you know, how bad it really was. And Reconstruction too, and how that affected Reconstruction and how Reconstruction affected, you know, going forward.
The step by step.
Yeah.
There's about that the collection that you were talking about. There's one. It was Belle Irvin's book. You quote it as being important because it changes the perspective of slaves at the time. Like, I think the quote you used in that was, it was a story about after, like, officers came and, like, took the slave master away, and they asked the slave, like, do you want to hang him? And he's like, no, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to see him suffer, or something along those lines. And you had said that book provided this big change in perspective on how you viewed slaves. Like, do you know more about that? I'm interested in what that means and, like, what you learned from that.
Well, I don't necessarily remember the title of the book, but I do remember that quote. And I changed the perspective because, you know, when you normally think about slavery, it's like you would probably assume that the slaves, you know, hated their master, obviously, because they're enslaved in these horrible conditions. But with that quote in specific, it kind of shows the other side where these people had been enslaved for so long and they had generations grow up and die on these plantations that this was their life, that they kind of viewed the master as family. And so they wouldn't want to see him hanged because he provided them, he took care of their family, you know, for generations, or his family took care of their family for generations. He supplied them with food. He supplied them with housing. You know, he probably told them, you know, you're better off with me. You know, you wouldn't want to be free out there because nobody would treat you as well as I would, kind of like a abusive relationship. But there's a book I believe I probably quoted in that paper, Masters Without Slaves by Dr. Rourke, which is my favorite book about this concept that I'm writing it's what I'm going to study in grad school, is the relationship between slaves and their masters. And that's what that book covers in the Civil War specifically. And it talks about how the slave masters viewed their slaves as family and as kind of their children. And so when they were freed from the Civil War and they didn't come back like they expected them to, it kind of turned this paternalism into resentment. And then that created the racism that followed all the way until Jim Crow in like the 1960s and to today.
Yeah, because I'd read something, and I don't think this is a generalization in your paper specifically, but you had said something about like the Reconstruction era. After that was less based on racism and more based on this like political entity, like trying to preserve like the slavery or the economy that it brought, or something along those lines. Is that a pretty accurate assessment? There probably was obviously racism involved, but
Oh, well, yeah.
yeah.
No doubt. But I think, because I don't really remember the paper, but if I was to guess what I was probably saying, I was probably talking about how Reconstruction and the politics that followed was probably all about preserving antebellum South. So the South, the culture of the South before the Civil War. Because there's a quote from a book by Eugene Genovese. What is it called? Well, I don't remember the name of the book. I forget. Hopefully I'll be able to remember. Anyways, he ends the last page in the book. The last line in the book is, they weren't just fighting for slavery. They were fighting for their lives. And if you read the book, you'll come to understand that these people weren't just fighting to keep the slaves near the end of the war. They were fighting to preserve the society that they had built in the South, which was based around slavery, but not necessarily about slavery.
Yeah.
The whole idea of like the mansion, the big white mansion down a long mangrove, driveway, top hats and carts and stuff in Charleston, and all this kind of antebellum early 1800s culture in the South that grew around it.
Okay, that makes sense. It's kind of a weird. It's weird to hear the multiple perspectives, and do you find that there's kind of the opposite effect of the uncomfortability when you start talking through these other perspectives? Do you feel like people would rather hear it from one perspective and be like good with that, or?
I'm sure people would probably just like to hear it from one perspective because it makes it less complicated, but I think including all the perspectives paints a bigger picture to really drive home the point.
Yeah, because I feel like even in what you just told me about this like preservation of the lives and stuff like that, I think that adds like almost a slightly empathetic tone towards the slave owners, and I feel like people would hear that and be like uncomfortable about it. Even you wanting to see like the other perspectives, despite me like absolutely agreeing with that and wanting the essentialness of getting all of their perspectives of people. Do you feel like you'd get kind of backlash or uncomfortability from trying to do that?
Well, if you're going to be a historian, you have to try your best to not be biased. And while obviously what they did were bad, it is also my job to understand their perspective, to understand, why did they feel this way? What drove them to want to preserve it? If I were this person right now living in that, why would I feel bad about losing it? It's because, it's what they grew up with, probably, the whole idea of having to convert to this northern style society, industrialization, all that stuff, it didn't sit well with them. And it's important to include that perspective because it paints the bigger picture. Because if you just do it from the northern perspective, you're essentially just writing from the perspective of the victor, and that's not always good.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I also I wanted to get some generalities on your studies because you've done this for a couple years now, and you're about to go into your thing. Are there things that like you'd really like to just teach the general people? Are there things that you learned that like, or specificities that like are really fun stories, or like really cool concepts that you learned, things you didn't know? Like I basically kind of want to like give you the floor to talk about these things that like you wish you knew, or you wish that you had the platform to like tell people about.
Well, I'm really interested in the relationships, like I said, with the slaves and between slaves, poor whites and former masters and stuff like that. That's what I'm going to be writing about, hopefully in grad school. That's the kind of thing that I didn't know about, and that's the kind of thing I wish more people knew about. Was their perspectives, and that's why I always recommend the book "Masters Without Slaves" by Rourke, because that's exactly what that touches on.
And what is walk me through like the relationship between the like poor white and what it mean, what group of people you're talking about when you say poor whites versus master versus.
So in the South, there was the elite ruling class, which was like plantation owners, and then there was like the poor whites. So that's like the people. That's like the people that would work, that didn't own slaves and would work regular jobs, and they were poor because if you weren't growing cotton or if you didn't have slaves, then you weren't rich. And then you had slaves. And there's interesting relationships because the people at the top viewed both sections of people at the bottom almost equally. There's, I forget the book and I forget the author, but there's multiple historians that cover this area that argue that if the South had won the Civil War and became the Confederate States of America and preserved slavery, they probably would have enslaved the poor whites too. Just because, they're not a part of the rich, posh society, they're not on our level. They just do work for us. So.
Damn, I couldn't even imagine a world in which like that's the way, an alternate universe in which something like that is even even possible. That's a bizarre concept too. I mean, what does that say about slavery in general though? It kind of seems like it would take away from a race-based hatred and would lean more towards like a class-based, like even if the class base is manufactured completely, like it seems like that would be more what it was about.
It was definitely race-based. Don't get it wrong.
No, yeah.
But, I mean, the whole idea about their whole economy was a slave economy. And if those people didn't own slaves, then, like, what good were they doing?
Mm. And so what specific relationship between these three groups were you wanting specifically to?
I'm really interested in, like, Civil War. So Reconstruction history is what I'm interested in. And I'm interested in the relationship between former slaves and former masters. There's some, because it continues off the idea of like the paternal resentment. And I think it'd be really interesting to look at like how the Klan developed off that same idea, because the Klan formed in 1866, 1 year after the war ended. And those people that formed that Klan terrorized free slaves for years. And those people still exist, and that's scary. There are chapters in Iowa.
Really?
Yes, indefinitely.
Like ones that they're not public about it. Is it kind of like a?
I would be surprised if they were public,
Like
but they aren't. They are not committing the same atrocities as their former Klan.
God, I sincerely hope not.
But I mean, there are clans in Iowa. There's probably clans in 50 states. Guaranteed.
Damn.
They're probably mostly online. Probably 99% of them don't have a chapter with like a base, like a physical church.
You're just talking about Reddit. You're just talking about what's the other one? 4chan.
There's a guy on TikTok that I've seen a few times where he goes on the Ku Klux Klan's website and he rates their merch.
Does it rate it well?
And I've mentioned that.
What's that shirt that you got?
Oh,
did it come in the mail? Did you get it yet?
I got it.
Dang, you should have worn it. You should have worn it to the pod.
I love that shirt so much. It's so cool.
What was on it again? It was like
it was a dude with a bat. I think he was an African American dude with a bat beating the shit out of a Klansman in front of his cross. So metal.
What, doesn't it say something on it?
Probably. I think it says Klux Busters.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely metal. Screw those guys.
Such a funny shirt, and it's like a squared out like picture. It's really good. It's a rarity.
It is rare.
So you had to order. There's like four shirts printed of it ever. Yeah, I said that. I don't know, that whole dichotomy is pretty interesting because, like you kind of mentioned, it's getting people are comparing it to a lot of the things that are happening today, and so it's just like a very interesting
white nationalism is on the rise.
Yeah, so. It's a very interesting thing. What do you think is like? walk me through that conversation and your perspective of it, because I wonder how like
On what?
on I just the comparisons of today to back then that people are making, and then like what are the common things that people are saying that you just like don't necessarily agree with, understanding, because I've always wondered what like an actual historian's perspective of, or aspiring historian, since you still got a little bit of time left, but you're basically a historian. Like what I wonder what that perspective like actually looks like.
I mean, the reason why white nationalism is growing is because over the years we have neglected to teach the Civil War and I think slavery properly. I think that's why it's on the rise, coupled with obviously a few other things. But
Well, what do you mean by neglected to teach? Is that like
you were too soft on who you're teaching it to. You didn't go deep enough. I don't think it's just like when someone is able to stand up and say that they hate everybody who's not white, that is a clear lack of education and probably maybe some mental things too. But I feel as though you can curb that kind of thinking if you educate people properly on history. You do not skip any event. You don't skip the atrocities. You really nail home the gravity of like, this is bad. This is why you can't do it. These are people too. That's another thing too. You really have to drive home that these people who were enslaved were people. They had lives. They had families. They had histories. You know, people in Africa lived in Africa thousands of years. They had, you know, I would say like advanced societies. They had complex societies. And because of colonization, Europe went in there and said, oh, well, it's not to European standard. It's not white marble and concrete blocks. It's not a parliament. So it's not advanced. So therefore it's lesser.
Do you think that we, like you and me at Madrid High School, what kind of education do you think we got?
Probably that.
Okay.
And probably. I mean, that's why I chose this thing, because I didn't know.
Okay.
And you know, I hope that people from our high school grow as people. I am certainly not the same person that I was in high school. But, you know, when we grew up in a small town of 90% white people.
I feel like I feel like I'm missing like a link here, or like a piece here, because it feels like even now, it feels like I understand the gravity of like slavery, and I don't know if that was independent research that I'd heard from other people,
Yeah.
or if that's like something that I was taught in school, but it feels like I wasn't super lacking, like not, I guess not a comprehensive, but I don't think anything we learned was like super comprehensive, like
No.
historically. It was kind of like a broad.
It was a
like,
general overview. And that's
Yeah,
what
like
I'm saying.
you taught-
It's
you
a
talk
high
about
school. It's a
everything.
high school course,
Yeah.
obviously, so you're not going to do it.
yeah, and so
I'd recommend you should take some Southern history courses
those
if you
other
get the
history
chance.
courses. Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's a point, or there's an aspect missing of this. So like when you're talking about people getting up and saying that they hate every race that's not their own, like do you think that most people don't look at that and see someone like just mentally ill, or like
No, I think
a
most
bad
obviously
person?
those people are a niche percentage. The people that are out publicly, you know, parading around.
Yeah.
Those are a very, 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 very niche percentage. But I think it's still.
Like the fact that it exists.
But you know what the problem is that they're the loudest voice,
It's very true.
and so their message gets across, and then it kind of helps them grow, so they aren't as niche, which is what's happening. I think. I mean, obviously, society as a whole probably condemns those people, but there are also people who silently sit by and don't necessarily have a problem with it.
I think. Do you think that would exist no matter what, or do you think that like?
Yeah, I mean, no matter how much you put into education, no matter how much you try, there will always be someone who gets that idea and runs with it. It's gonna be human nature because we all don't think the same. But I think if you put in the effort to learn and to understand their perspective, to understand, understand different perspectives, understand the history, understand how the history affects today, we would be, people would be better off people would be more understanding. People would maybe not let people publicly announce these things.
Well, yeah, and I really like your perspective on this because it's primarily like solution based. Like it's based off of like here is an educational curriculum that I think would result in this solution and do these things. And I feel like there's a common response of like, well, it doesn't solve the entire problem, so it's not. Let's just not do it. And I feel like that's what a ton
That's
of people
that's such a
do.
defeatist
I
mentality.
know. I feel like that's what a ton of people do. Towards like, well, it doesn't cover this aspect, this aspect. And
You're
this
not going to
aspect,
get
so let's just not do
everyone.
it. Yeah, and
But
so
the more people you get, the better.
yeah, it's like a net positive. You know what I mean? That's why I like, and I also like the perspective because it's niche enough to where like people would ask, why are you doing this work? Like people would struggle to see the scope of it, but I feel like you're genuinely interested in it, and like you have this genuine interest, and it just spawns this solution. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily that you were like looking for this issue, finding a super niche thing that isn't an issue and finding it's like no, like you found a problem. Here's the solution to it, and regardless of the actual scope or scale of it, it's still worth pursuing like a solution.
It's worth trying. I'm not saying that this curriculum is going to be the end all,
Yeah,
but it might help.
well, yeah, and I think that's just like a really important perspective that people are missing when they talk about these things. Where I feel like a common defense against like this whole ideology is again that it doesn't solve everything or that it doesn't. Um, it's not going to make people whatever. Like people are going to be bad, but that's I agree that this is just like a really defeatist way of looking at it. And I don't think it actually like solves this. Just so I have like super respect for this position and
It's an easy.
the work you're doing.
It's an easy way to not. Well, again, it's this uncomfortable thing, because I guarantee there are people out there who they might feel uncomfortable to think this way, and so, you know, if you say, oh well, it doesn't fix the whole problem, well, in a way, that's you kind of just avoiding the problem as a whole and just saying, well, it doesn't directly affect me, so it's fine.
Yeah. There's a lot of like doing nothing solves the problem when like doing something. I don't think like you can guess all you want about the implications of implementing something, but you can never like fully understand unless you try it. And if there is even more problem than not, I don't understand like the idea that you shouldn't even try it. You know.
Yeah.
And so that's why I do really appreciate the perspective. Um, and again, it seems that like or you're studied, you know, and so it's really cool to get this perspective from someone who actually like understands it and has like researched it and looked into it and done all of those things too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder, I kind of wanted to get this grasp on, some again, the kind of more of these important things that you have learned. You know what I mean? So like you kind of talked about the things that you're going to look into or these concepts that are really interesting to you. But are there things that like you learned specifically that you wish the public would know or hear or that would kind of help with this education? Like if you were teaching a history class, like what are some of the things that you would feel important to mention?
Well, obviously, if I were to teach a history class about American slavery, I'd probably start with the slave trade. I'd start with colonization of Africa, and I'd talk about the perspective, like the Western perspective on Africa, which I think is important. That whole idea that, oh well, they're not the whole connotation, the development of like the word savage around sticking it to African people and African cultures comes from that idea, and that's really damaging because the Europeans looked at them as quote unquote savage because they weren't dressed up in suit and tie, they didn't have tea at noon, they didn't have a queen, and all that stuff. So I'd start there, and I think that would be a good build to understand. Because if you can understand that perspective, then it paints them more as human. So then when you see them get enslaved, then now you can look at it a little bit differently. And then when they get to America, you gotta talk about the conditions they were in. You gotta talk about the horrible treatment and stuff like that. And I think that's what you gotta focus on. And then what you gotta focus on is near like the end of the war. You gotta talk about how that affected slavery or like the people who were enslaved. And so that's when I would use that quote. where it's like, I don't want to see him hanged, even though he's done horrible things. So I think that would paint it as like these people have been forced into this lifestyle and it's the only thing they knew. And so when the time comes where they're like, oh, well, we can actually, punish this guy for you if you want. It's like, oh no, that guy's family. I wouldn't want that. And then after that, I would talk about Reconstruction. I would talk about Jim Crow, the Klan, talk about how the implementation of certain structures in the United States still disproportionately affect colored people and stuff like that.
Yeah, I feel like I can remember the sections like in the book talking about those things, but I don't think we ever like actually like read that. Like I remember its existence, but it just wasn't in the curriculum.
Like they tell you about the event, but they don't delve deep, which like again, high school history course in small town Iowa.
Yeah.
But, they did their best. They're probably also following like a curriculum guide.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm sure implemented because like obviously the state educational board has like what you should teach. And so that's another big problem.
Mm-hmm.
State education boards need to, I think, put more emphasis on it than just like a week. But
do you feel like you understand the common disagreements of like your positions on this? Like, what do you think like a not racist person who disagrees with your take on this is thinking?
A not racist person, okay. What would they be thinking? I mean, maybe I guess like the only question I could see is just like they just don't see the importance of it. Like they know slavery is bad. They know that they're people, but they just don't see like, why should I care? Like, why should I look into this?
Mm-hmm.
We live side by side now.
Yeah.
We all have friends. We all have African American friends. We have all sorts of friends.
Mm-hmm.
And they come from all different backgrounds. So like, why should we do that now if we all live as one in society, but we don't?
Okay, and so that's kind of like the end goal is that like the solutions learned from these problems are supposed to be implemented today to solve some of the problems that exist today. Is that like kind of your general importance?
Yeah, I mean, when I wrote that, I was thinking about problems today. When I wrote that, it was like problems that I see today.
Right. Okay.
And so when I wrote that, it's like if this were to be published, it would try to help solve problems today.
Right.
That I see as someone who's been reading the material, who studies it.
Yeah.
And people are welcome to disagree, but
no, I welcome it as well. But I think, like I said, I think it's an educated perspective that this comes from, and I think it's really cool.
Yeah,
it's cool. Well, we've gotten a little bit over an hour, but I kind of wanted to give you the floor to talk about any of the lasting things you want people to know, or any of the audience things, or some of the important things to leave the group off of.
I suppose just don't take everything you read at face value. Research it yourself. I think most people should develop the skill to be able to discern between whether it's something to read or whether it's, pandering. It came from a think tank that was funded by people to purposely put out that idea.
I think that's super important too.
I think if you can do that, if you can really look between the lines for yourself, that's good for you. It's good for you. So that's kind of my message.
Well, Sam, it was awesome having you on. I can't wait to talk to you when you're Dr. Pogue. have you on the show again, soon. Or when we have our French horn concert, we do a duo rendition of Cumberland Cross again. But it was awesome having you on.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.